So this girl walks up to me and she says, "Hey, Rooster." And I say, "Rooster?" She goes, "Well, I hear you've got a really big..." Alright, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking about pet names today. Nicknames, or just things people call you that are not your name. And of course, we are naked because we are being honest and open and telling the world that, you know, we want to be honest and open and we have nothing to hide. It's December now in California, and this is a little on the cold side because my brother refuses to run the heater, but we're going to set that aside there. And we're going to talk about pet names. And Trisha Hirschberger asked, what is the pet name you hated the most that somebody called you that I guess was not a friend of yours? And I would have to say, for me, that was cheesecake. Given the fact that I was called that by a very large man in a guard uniform while I was on duty working with said large man, annoyed me. And further, I went and talked to human resources of that company about it and said, I feel this is racism. They're calling me Wonder Bread and Cheesecake, and she's saying, I don't see it. Well, look, those items are white, I'm white, and all the people calling me this happen to not be white. Unless you're telling me that, you know, the guards think of me as cheesecake, as in something they wish to consume, because, look, the other guy was fat too, so he can't be calling me fat. Because cheesecake is very fatty. Again, there's a motorcycle. What am I trying to say here is that it's not the fact that somebody called me a cheesecake, it's the context within which this was used. Now, I happen to have a friend, and I've asked her permission to talk about her life in this particular video. Her name is Nat. Well, Natalie, I call her Nat. She lives in New York, and her husband runs the Miller Puppet Co., which makes really good puppets, from what I understand. I haven't actually gotten to use any of them because they're kind of beyond my price range, but we'll set that aside as well. And Nat has this problem. She walks through New York, and people often call her things like baby, and, you know, I don't remember the exact names, but the reason this is a bad thing for her is, one, she's married, and two, you know, she'll be walking with her child, so obviously this would imply an attached woman here, but of course, this is the modern age, and, you know, not every woman with a child is attached, and further along those lines, women are not always that honest. I mean, I know Natalie, I know that she would never cheat on her husband. At least that's the impression that I get. She seems like a really nice person. It's one of those people you just love to know. But, you know, not everybody knows Natalie. But the reason Nat is upset about this is not because someone is making an inappropriate comment about her, but because it's New York, and she's a female walking alone or looking after a child. And there are a few times you can feel more vulnerable than when you're looking after a child. Nose itch. Gets me every time. So here again, it's a context issue. There's no particular name I hate. It's the fact that it's a context issue. I mean, if I walked up there and probably said, hey, Angel, to Natalie, she probably wouldn't think much of it because we've been friends for... Oh dear, we met in college, almost 10 years now. Been friends with Natalie. You know, and she knows me, and she knows I'm not going to do anything stupid. But when some random stranger does it, it's not exactly a nice thing to do. And then, you know, those of you who have watched my videos, not necessarily on this channel, but back on Random Street Theater, you know that I had a friend, 18 years. This person was one of my closest consorts, and he refused to call me Richard. Had to call me Rick. Ironically, you know, I started going by Richard in high school, freshman year of high school, and he started calling me Rick I think at the edge of the 2000s. So he had been calling me Rick for 9 years, 9, 10 years at that point, and I couldn't stand it. I told him, how about you call me Neal? Because that's what you called me in high school. He absolutely refused. He'd sit there and he'd cry. And the reason this was a big thing to me, of course, number one was because they had changed my name on my transcripts to Ricky. Because my name is Richard. I went by Ricky, and literally, by the time I was in high school, I had trouble spelling Richard because I honestly didn't know that Ricky was short for Richard. No one had ever called me Richard. Ever. I had seen the name once in kindergarten, and I had been confused because no one had ever called me Richard. And I have nerve damage. Spelling is hard for me. It's always been hard for me. I was 22 years old before I could spell my middle name because I had used it so rarely. You know, I didn't actually know how to pronounce it either, so that's why spelling it was so hard. But so I had two reasons I hated being called anything but my own name. So I insisted on being called Richard. I insist on writing my name as Richard Leland Neal, even though there's another Richard Leland Neal out there, and he is it's kind of a shyster apparently. I've never met him, but I've read articles about him. So, moving forward. But here was the thing. This guy was calling me Rick, and then he wanted me to do things for him. Like, he wanted me to play pool with him. I hate playing pool, and I hate playing pool with him because the entire time he's being rude and disgusting and farting and, you know, making it a terrible time. So here was the thing. It wasn't that he called me Rick. It was that he refused to call me Richard. If he wrote down my name on a note, he would put Rick, which is like, I write down Nat all the time for Natalie, but you know, this isn't the name that strikes a particular chord, and if she asked me to stop, I would stop calling her Nat. It's that simple, because we're friends. This guy, it's like, it is a condition of the friendship that I call you Rick. So yeah, the context there is that he's being disrespectful. It's not a term of endearment. So again, you know, that is rude, and that's what bothers me. Now, I have to put out that in the context that Trisha Hirschberger mentioned it, what she was talking about is at restaurants, often waitresses will call you hun or dear or something like that. And, you know, normally you really shouldn't be offended by it, but some people are professionally offended. I mean, it's what is the only way to not be offensive is to be completely silent. And I can tell you, there are people who would look at this video and be offended that I'm nude, be offended that I'm fat, be offended that I'm a Caucasian with blonde hair, strawberry blonde hair, and blue eyes, be offended by this. I mean, it's literally, there's nothing, people are professionally offended in the modern day. This is a big problem. So, what do we do about that is, you know, you just kind of have to say, okay, you're professionally offended, and there's nothing I can do about that. So I'm not going to bother trying to deal with you. So yeah, I mean, like I say, it's not the name itself, it's generally the context and meaning. I mean, I know of a few people on this world that could probably get away with calling me cheesecake without really upsetting me. I think I'm more of a cheese wheel at this point, but that's kind of beside the point. So yeah, that's my take on the matter. I would refrain from calling people you don't know by any kind of name. Just say, excuse me, what's your name? Or call them sir or ma'am, which is what I used to do as a security officer, or that I still do as a security officer. But I'll tell you, there was one time someone was even offended by the fact that I called her ma'am. She felt it made her feel old. So yeah. Now, it is the custom at this time for me to ask a question. I shall ask a question that relates to one of James Wisdom's last videos, because you know he did a Naked Truth topic of his own. And that question will be, what are you doing with your life? I'd like to know, either in a video response or in the comments down below. And if you make a video response, you need to send me a link, because YouTube doesn't do that anymore. Bad YouTube.